The League tutorial is infamously bad. It teaches almost nothing, it feels like a chore to get through, and it leaves us with no guidance after we complete it. The first step in somebody's League journey should be a very warm welcome. It's a very important step to make sure that our new players are staying engaged in the game and they're excited to tackle the giant game that is League. And right now, I feel like our in-game systems just aren't providing that for us. Today, I want to talk about how to approach the game as a new player, what to think about, and some things to work on. And I want to introduce you guys to all of the basic fundamentals. I'm going to break this video into two different major categories. The first one being mechanics and the second one being macro, and both being very, very important. So let's get started. Section 1, mechanics. League has very unique mechanics, and it's often one of the hardest hurdles for new players to get over. There aren't a lot of games similar to League, so even if you have a lot of gaming experience, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that you have to learn from scratch. However, I think there are three of the most kind of foundational fundamental mechanics that I'm going to talk about today that will be the foundation for everything you build on top of it. The first being camera control, the second being character movement, and the third being champion specifics. So let's go ahead and start with the first, camera control. This is the ability to move your camera around, not only in fights, so you can see everything that's happening in fights, but also to other lanes and other areas of the map, so that you can gather all of the information necessary. I view this as using your resources. If you don't have good camera control, you don't have all the information, you can't make good quality decisions. And this is a mechanic to get used to how to kind of look at things, right? So the in-game tutorial will actually encourage you to keep your camera locked, which is absurd because if you play with a fully locked camera all of the time, you will see very little and it will be very hard for you to adapt to higher level camera movement as you progress through the game. When I first started playing, all the way back in the day in season 1, like 13 years ago, people actually, the high elo players would say, hey, you have to play with an unlocked camera. Like if you ever lock your camera, you're trolling. And they would always manually move their camera and they would never ever lock their camera. These days it's different. Generally a hybrid is considered to be perfect, where in the fight you're able to lock your camera so you know where your character's at, you know where to move, and you don't really kind of lose anything. You can use your brain on other things. But you need to be able to move your camera to, hit long range skill shots. You need to see the other lanes. You need to be able to, F key is something that high elo players do, where they move their camera to the other lanes very quickly. What I want you guys to do as newer players is to set the foundation for good camera control later while still making it easy for you. So locking your camera is okay for most of the game. However, you do not want to keep it statically locked, right? You don't want to just hit a button and just always have it locked all the time. That's really bad. You want to hold spacebar. By default, spacebar recenters your camera to your character, right? So it locks your camera as long as you're holding it. That's okay, and that's what the good players do, is they hold spacebar pretty frequently or they tap it a lot. So I want you guys to, if you want to lock your camera, get into the habit of locking it with spacebar, and that's okay to lock it with spacebar. And then that will encourage you to move your camera when you have free time or when you have free space in your brain, and it will make transitioning into better camera control easier further down the line. Movement is the second fundamental, and it's the general ability to just move your character concisely. It sounds simple, but there's actually an incredible amount of depth, and this is one of the most complex topics to League of Legends mechanics. The difference between bad and good movement is massive, and oftentimes this decides who wins fights, is who is able to move cleaner, better, and sharper. So you want to move in ways that will kind of give you opportunities to use your auto attacks and use your spells and set up your teammates while reducing the enemy's opportunities so you take less damage. Right? This is often called spacing. If you hear people talk about spacing or auto spacing or whatever, sometimes called orb walking, all of these terms are ways to describe movement. This is a really complex topic. However, there's two core fundamentals to movement you want to think about. The first one is quantity and just how much you click. The more you click, the more potential you have to move your character quicker, right? If you click really slow, what happens is your character moves really slowly on these long, straight lines. It feels very slow. We call it linear movement. And the issue with linear movement is it's very slow, it's very predictable, and therefore punishable. So the more you click, the more potential you have to mess it up. The second part is where you click, the quality part of your movement. So there's two general rules to the quality movement. You want to be able to click closer to your character because the longer, like the further away you click, let's say you click really far on the right side and then really far on the left side, your cursor has to travel farther. So as your cursor travels farther, you'll move, it'll take you longer to change directions, once again creating long linear movement. If you're able to click closer to your character, you're able to change directions much quicker. It's much sharper, it's much cleaner, where you can kind of think about it like boxing footwork, or maybe a wide receiver in American football, right? You need those those turns to be sharp. You need that movement to be crisp. It's the same thing in League. You want your movement to be crisp and sharp. If it's slow and you're kind of taking these long wide turns and these slow linear movement, you're very predictable and you're not getting past anybody, you're not getting through anybody. The last part to mechanics is champion specifics. Now, there are over 160 champions in League right now, so obviously I'm not going to be able to go over all of them. However, I want to emphasize that champion specifics are a massive part of League. That's what makes this game so fun. There's a champion that fits everybody. So you got to find a champion that fits for you. And when you're new, I recommend you try out lots of champions and lots of different roles to get a feel for what's possible. However, since it's so important to know what your abilities do and know how to play, for every champion you're interested in playing, I highly recommend going into a bot game or a practice tool game and just messing around with your abilities. Use them on the wave, use them on the bots, use them on some dummies in practice tool. Think about, how is every one of my spells supposed to be used? Why did Riot put it there? What is it strong against? What are the weaknesses left in my character? Maybe play some ARAM games to get a feel for what the different characters do. All of these are good ideas so you can kind of get a feel for what the mechanics are supposed to look like, how they're supposed to flow, and then when you go into your games, you can work on really mastering them. Champion mastery, that is knowing what your champion does and then knowing how to execute it well, is the most important fundamental for climbing rank in League of Legends. So as you start to get better and more experienced and you level up and you get into ranked, you want to start to narrow down on some champions that you really, really like and go master those fundamentals. Master, when they do their things, how you use your spells, how you do your spacing, and how that all works for you with your champion and your specific playstyle. Section 2, macro. Now for the complicated part. Macro and game ideas. So League macro can get very complex because of just the sheer numbers of champions and the possible team compositions. But the good news is there are some core ideas, some foundational ideas that all these champions are kind of built on and balanced around. The most fundamental concept in all of League of Legends is gold. The rich win games. Gold rules everything. So the biggest question to winning a League game is, how can I get the most money? Now, every champion and every role is going to have a different take on this question, and there's different ways to get gold. So for example, when you last hit a minion, when you end up getting the killing blow on a minion, you get a little bit of gold. When you kill a tower, you get some gold. When you kill a champion or get an assist, you get some gold. When you do jungle camps, you get some gold, and some objectives grant gold. Depending on, different champions will want to do different things. Some champions will play around getting really high CS numbers. That means killing a lot of minions, right? That's CS means minion score. So there are some champions, let's say you're playing a Victor mid lane or you're playing an ADC. Pretty much all ADCs are very dependent on having very high CS. They have to kill a lot of minions to have all their money. Some other champions, maybe like an early game jungler, are more focused on getting early kills and snowballing that way. So your champion influences how you get the gold, but at the end of the day, everything boils down to gold. And this is one of the ways that you can help yourself understand the game, is you can try to simplify in terms of gold. And I'm going to give you some ways to do that. Roughly speaking, 15 CS is about 1 kill. That's about 300 gold. You get 300 gold for a kill. You get about 300 gold for 15 CS. 1 tower plate is 175 gold. And so that's, 2/3 of a kill, roughly a little bit less than that. So when you're able to boil everything down to gold, you can really ask yourself, well, what's the most gold efficient thing for me to do right now? Is it to catch this wave that has, this many minions? Is it to pressure this kill that I have X amount of chance of getting? Or is it to pressure this tower? Or is it to roam bottom? The answer to the question is always, what's the highest chance at the most possible gold? And that answer changes based on who you're playing with, and who you're playing against. But it always comes down to the amount of gold you can get. The second piece of macro every new player needs to kind of get a feel for is the difference between lane phase and mid to late game. So lane phase, or early game, is basically when everybody goes to their assigned roles, the top laners go top, the mid laners go mid, the ADCs go bot lane, the supports go bot lane, and the jungles clear the jungle camps. So I view lane phase kind of like the opening in chess. It's the part where everybody goes to their pre-designated spots and your performance in the lane phase dictates your options later in the game, right? You know, if you play chess and you play a really good opening and your opponent like throws away all their pieces and now you're up a bunch of pieces, your mid game is going to be really easy. You just close the game out super easy. You're up all the pieces. You don't even have to think really. But if you mess up your opening, you mess up the lane phase, it gets really hard to play. You know, maybe you're down a queen and it's like, oh my goodness, we need a miracle to come back here. So it's really important to spend a lot of time emphasizing the lane phase and the early game. League is a very front-loaded game. The rich get richer. If you can get money in lane, it's easier to get money later. And again, this game is all about gold and income and power level. So this part requires you to go to your assigned lane and you want to learn your matchups and you want to learn how your champion gets gold in lane phase. So for all of our laners, mid laners, top laners, ADCs, that means you have to learn how to last hit well. For my junglers, it means you have to learn how to clear your camps well. You have to, look up some clear guides, go and practice clearing a little bit. And for my supports, it means you have to figure out how to apply pressure in lane to deny the enemy team gold so that your ADC is up a lot through that pressure. And then you have to try to get as strong as possible. And that's what lane phase is all about. Lane phase is very complicated and it's very dependent on your champion, which is the tricky part about macro because there's so many champion dependents. But lane phase is definitely the most important part. Look up some guides on your champion for how to play lane and think about getting those last hits. Think about how to kill your direct lane opponent in lane. Think about these kind of early lane phase fundamentals. So after lane phase ends, typically after the tier 1 towers fall and your teammates start to move throughout the map, that's called the mid game. And the mid and late game, they work very similarly. And now your roles switch up. Your roles completely switch up. And now it becomes less of a journey of how to get gold. So lane phase is all about how can you get yourself ahead as much as possible. It's a more individual. Mid to late game is now the team game is beginning. You are now becoming a piece of a team. You're no longer just a laner in your game. You're now a cog in your team. And your job is to be a good cog so your machine runs smoothly. Now, what this means is people are going to start going to different lanes. People are going to start fighting over objectives and people are going to start team fighting more often. So where do we go? Very generally, and this is kind of very dependent on the game and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but very generally, the bot laners will go mid lane. So the ADC and support will take over mid lane. And then if you have teleport, you'll go further away from the next objective. So let's say Dragon's up in a minute and Baron's up in 5 minutes. And you can always check by hitting tab. Then the person with teleport will go away from the dragon that's up in 1 minute. And then if you don't have teleport, you'll go near the objective in that bot lane near the dragon, or you'll play in between the mid and bot. So the most important thing in mid game is to play with your team. So if your team is setting up for the dragon that's there in 1 minute, you have to also be playing for it. So if they're fighting mid, trying to gain prio so they can get the dragon, you got to go mid too. If, you're playing, you have teleport and you're on the opposite side of the dragon, you have to be watching for the teleport and think, okay, if my team ever goes in, I'm going to teleport. And that's the goal. If your team is off the map because they just recalled, you have to recall with them. Otherwise, again, your pressure is going to be mismatched. So this idea of matching pressure is called tempo. And you want to be on tempo with your team for as long as possible. 90% of the time, the correct macro decision, the correct play at any given time is the play that your teammate is getting ready for, is the play that your team can agree to do. So in the mid game, you become a team player. You have to keep an eye on your team. There's not a science to where to go. There's not a science on what to do. It's a thing where you watch your teammates, you think, okay, what are they doing? And then you think, how can I help that at the same time? So you got to think, okay, where does my champion in my role want to be relative to them? And then when are they applying the pressure so that I can apply my pressure at the same time? That's what tempo is all about. And that's what mid game is all about. Trying to stay on the same page as your team. This is going to mean, when you're new, it's okay to be like 4 people mid. If your whole team's mid and you're ready to go down mid lane, go fight with them. Take a big fight. If your team, if you're a split pusher, make sure you're split pushing when your team is fighting mid. Play actively with your team. If you see your whole team's recalling, make sure you recall with them, that kind of thing. So when the mid game starts, it's a little bit dependent. It starts to happen when towers start to fall. It also is more likely to happen as the game goes on. Usually, I think like 15 to 16 minutes is about the latest the game timer will ever get before it turns into mid game. But the most important thing is you keep an eye on the map. So it's going to be different, especially when you're playing with other new players who don't know where to be at necessarily. It's your job to look at everybody and say, okay, where are they going? How can I be a good cog? How can I make this team, this machine, go nicely? How can I be the best teammate? That's what mid game is all about. So lane phase, it's all about gold. You are trying to get as much gold as possible. Mid game, it's all about team pressure. You're trying to be a good team. And it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you do the things with your team, right? If it's going down mid and breaking towers, if it's getting the objectives, the dragons, the barons, if it's pushing other lanes, if it's getting kills, all of those will result in getting a bigger lead, and you could snowball and get a bigger lead, and eventually you guys just win. But you have to play with your team. A lot of the most common mistakes I see are mistakes where people aren't playing with their team and the tempo kind of gets mismatched. And I have lots more videos on this if you guys do want to learn more. However, I think we'll leave it at this for today. This is kind of just a very intro to what League of Legends is and what matters when you start playing it. So these two kind of base foundational ideas should be a good starting point to get you guys thinking about the game. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, it's going to be about 17 minutes in, and you're a new player, I want you to go down below, type 17 minutes, and tell me the champion that you're playing. And I will tell you, and the role, because sometimes champions can play in multiple roles. So tell me the champion and the role that you like playing, and I will give you some general tips and the most common mistakes I see on that champion to help be a little bit more specific about these points. I'll talk about what's important for you to focus on. You know, do you need CS? Do you need early kills? How do you need to approach the game? That kind of thing. And I'll give you all of the tips that I've learned through my time playing and coaching playing for the past 13 years, coaching for the past, I think we're going on 3 years now. I mean, even if you guys aren't a new player, you might as well drop the champion if you made it here. I'll give you my thoughts and my most common tips. Let me know your rank and you know how you guys are doing. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really hope it helps some new players embark on their league journey, because I love seeing new people get into this game. I love seeing people kind of explore what this game has. I'll see y'all in tomorrow's video. Peace.